Well, there are developments from overnight on the crisis in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has moved troops into Crimea. That is a region with a mostly Russian-speaking population, a move that the Ukrainian Prime Minister says is a declaration of war. Vladimir Putin and President Obama spoke yesterday for 90 minutes, a conversation the White House described as the toughest of the Obama presidency. As for Ukraine, a new government there is mobilizing its reserves and authorizing the call-up of all men under the age of 40. CBS News correspondent Charlie D'Agata is in Kiev this morning. Charlie, people are again out in the square. What's going on there?
Yeah, Bob, there are about 1,000 demonstrators and protests that arrived here. The numbers have swollen since the situation in Crimea. Today we've been hearing them saying down with Russian President Vladimir Putin. They're calling him a liar and a dictator. The Ukrainian Prime Minister said that the country is on the brink of disaster and they're preparing for war. And the way they've done that is they put the standing military, 130,000 people or so, on high alert. But they've also put the call out to reserves using websites and radio, saying to stand by for further information and instruction. They may have to go to military centers around Kiev and around Ukraine and report for duty, fighting men under 40 years old. Now, we haven't seen, it doesn't feel like this area itself is under threat. There's no military presence at the airport or around the squares or on the roads. But the real concern is around the eastern border, along the border with Russia, where you have a lot of Russian-speaking people, a lot of Russian loyalties. And the concern is whether Russian troops will advance in those areas, and more importantly, what Ukrainian forces can do, if anything, to defend against that.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. CBS News foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is in southern Ukraine this morning, and she is en route to the Crimea region. Liz, what's the latest?
Thousands of Russian troops are fanning out over the Crimean Peninsula, taking control. They're uniformed and they are setting up at strategic locations. Many of them were based in the Crimea anyway with the Russian Black Sea Fleet on a lease agreement with the Ukraine. Well, they've left the bases and they're out on active duty. Also, it appears that some hundreds of soldiers have been brought in from elsewhere in Russia. Now, not a shot has been fired. This has been very peaceful. In fact, a lot of the people, Russian-speaking, pro-Russian population of Crimea, have welcomed those troops and their mission, which, according to Vladimir Putin, is to protect the Russian-speaking population.
And I understand you've had quite an eventful trip en route to the Crimea.
That's right, Bob. We drove a long way from Kiev and finally got to this rather informal border across the neck that leads onto the Crimean Peninsula. And there was a barricade in the road manned by what we thought were Ukrainian troops. Well, it turns out these guys had switched sides. They'd hoisted the Russian flag at their barricade and they were backed up by a group of local men in camouflage gear, also armed, who came and raided our truck, took our gear apart and stole our body armor. Not only did they steal it, they put it on right away, helmets and flak jackets, walked off with it and told us to get out of there, that they weren't going to let us in.